Hello, hello. This is David Lausa, and this is my Biomed final project. So we're going to start off with the definition of death. Death can be categorized in several different ways. So we have brain death, which is the complete and complete and utter lack of brain function. It's completely irreversible, and unfortunately, you can't do anything about this. And brain death is essentially the final boss of death. You can't do anything about it. The differences between clinical and legal death are the fact that clinical death is the stopping of the heart, and if no medical intervention is taken, unfortunately, it can soon be categorized as legal death, which is irreversible death. Different types of death are going to be natural, accidental, undetermined, suicide, pending, and pending. Sorry about that. Natural is going to be caused from diseases or natural causes. So any different disease from way back when, dying from things like the flu to COVID, or just dying in one sleep, natural causes. Accidental is going to be unexpected events such as car crashes, which can also be categorized as things like homicide, but that's not on these categories. So those are things like accidental deaths, just unexpected events that were not supposed to happen. Undetermined is going to be deaths that were, of course, caused by, maybe different things such as natural causes, maybe homicide, different things. But the thing about undetermined death is the fact that there's little to no information as to how it happened. Suicide is going to be self-inflicted harm, meaning to injure or kill oneself. Pending is going to be, the reasons of their death not being listed yet, for some reason or another. Palliative versus hospice care. Palliative, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is going to be anytime, anytime, anywhere, not anywhere, anytime, however. Anytime, attentive care. Versus hospice care is going to be the last 6 weeks of somebody's projected lifespan. So hospice care will be for somebody patients with cancer or deadly diseases, things like that. That's what hospice care is, just to maintain their states and well-being in these last 6 weeks. So for funeral and care of the body, was the funeral prearranged? No. For Grandma Laura, no, it was not, unfortunately. But I'll tell the story of Grandma Laura later. And the funeral home we will be using is the Ted Dickey Funeral Home, which is going to be the funeral home actually right next to Williams High School. And that's why, I decided to choose well, not me, but, Grandma Laura's family decided to choose that one because it's real close to home. And funeral homes are not actually required in the state of Texas. But, however, we're using one. The vocabulary of death, a lot of different terms. So, algor mortis is going to be the first stage of changes that occurs during death in the body. So, algor mortis is going to be the cooling of the body to surrounding temperature. Rigor mortis is next up, and that's going to be the stiffening of the muscles. So every muscle in your body essentially constricts. Livor mortis is next, which is going to be the blood settling to lower extremities of the body because of gravity. So essentially the blood just all pools to essentially the part of the body that's facing, the ground the most, at least, since all of the gravity is taking the blood from top to bottom, essentially. Autolysis is essentially the cells breaking down and releasing enzymes that starts self-digestion, or, the body essentially eating itself. Kind of gross. Cadaveric spasm is going to be the instant stiffening of muscles as soon as death happens, which follows rigor mortis. Well, rigor mortis follows that. And then desiccation is going to be the loss of moisture in the body. So essentially just the body becoming drying out, essentially. And if you see in movies, where the body's like a skeleton, this is that, or like the cheeks are really drawn in, it's just because the body's so dry because of that. An autopsy. The definition of an autopsy is an examination to find the cause of a death. So because I mentioned before, an undetermined death, an autopsy would be really big in situations like these. The reasons for an autopsy are going to be to uncover unknowns, determine effectiveness of treatments, and to inform the next of kin of various pieces of information. What I mean by various pieces of information are possible genetic disorders that they should look out for that could have caused the death of said loved one prior. Uncover unknowns, like I said, maybe even possibly new diseases or just diseases we didn't know a said person had in the first place. And if there's new treatments to be made, we could determine the effectiveness of said treatments by doing an autopsy on the body to see how it affected the person when they were alive and how it still affected them possibly in death. An autopsy, it's not necessary, and it's up to a medical examiner's discretion. And for Grandma Laura, in this case, we don't need an autopsy. If we want one, yes, we can request for one to happen, and the next of kin needs to give permission. It is also necessary to have an autopsy when the cause of death is unknown. Autopsies mostly happen in the first 24 to 48 hours of death because that is going to be when the body is most fresh off of death and when you can get the best results from your autopsy. And the autopsy is going to be $2,500 to $5,000. $5,000. Organ tissue donation. Grandma Laura can donate essentially all her organs, but her brain, her heart. Since she had a stroke, that's going to affect her brain, and she had a stroke because of a heart attack. So unfortunately, no heart donations. However, things like her liver can still be donated. There is no age on organ donors, so good old Grandma Laura can still donate her organs while she is old lady. Conditions may affect your status in terms of donation. So things like HPV and HIV can inhibit individuals from donating their organs, of course. But I mean, other than that, if you don't have those conditions, you should be good. Unless your organs have problems, in which case, don't donate those. Even though Grandma Laura is already dead, she can still donate her organs, of course. The next of kin has to consent in order for if the organ donor is already dead and they have not signed off on like their license or anything like that that they'd like to donate their body to science, the next of kin has to give permission. The recipients of the organ may not know its origins; they're not allowed to. And prices for receiving an organ is anywhere from $57,000 for like a cornea to $2,346,500 for a heart. Funeral services. Funeral homes jobs are to deal with getting death certificates, cremation, graveside services, embalming, etc. Different things like that. Dealing with coffins, caskets, all those different things. Burial transits is permission to for the body to be buried and to be transited from state to state in different places like that. Embalming is the slowing of the death process by using a chemical to essentially preserve the body and make it more presentable. Cremation is converting the body from solid to gas by burning it at high temperatures. Embalming is used to preserve the body, and cremation can be religious or can be used to reduce land usage and preserve natural resources, or in a little bit of a different case, for us, being Grandma Laura later. Copies of death certificates are going to be used for the next of kin to arrange burial or cremation, and the costs for our personal costs at Ted Dickey will be about $9,925, and the next of kin pays for all of the funeral arrangements. Funeral services part 2. Caskets. There's no official rules on caskets other than the fact that it has to be generally 84 inches in length, 24 inches in width, and 23 inches height-wise. Like, when I say height-wise, I mean from like down to bottom. Like length is like, yeah. Vaults, for vaults, they have to enclose all sides of the caskets. Other than that, there's no really crazy rules on vaults, and they're not mandatory. Embalming is not required. However, if it's done, the body has to be preserved in a special container when it is being kept. Cremation, the next of kin gets to choose what happens to the ashes of the deceased, and urns are not required. When we went to the funeral home that we went to, we were told that the next of kin could even keep their ashes of the loved ones inside with little necklaces, things like that. So the next of kin gets to choose what happens to those. If you'd like to bury a deceased person in another state, you will need 2 mortuaries and a fully paid burial plot. Only because, additionally, only because Grandpa Joe is a veteran, Grandma Laura may be buried in a military cemetery, if that was in her will, of course, if she'd like to. Speaking of wills, a living will is a breakdown of a deceased individual's desires after, a will is a breakdown of a deceased individual's desires after they pass. A living will is a directive on an individual's own medical treatment. For example, if someone is on a ventilator and they want to pull the plug because they don't want to live like that, if their living will says that they should do so, then the doctor should do so. They can't really, the doctor should do so, yes. A durable medical power of attorney is essentially allowed to make medical decisions for the dependents. So, for example, a durable medical power of attorney can be someone's wife, and said somebody can be on a bed, unable to make their own decisions. This durable medical POA can make said medical decisions for the dependent. A last will and testament is going to be legal documentation detailing the desires of the deceased's assets and their dependents. Dependents being like children, things like that. Wills executed outside the U.S. are applicable so long as they're applicable in the place that they're created. Just like the example of Grandpa Joe creating a last will in Italy. Just so long as it's applicable in Italy, the U.S. deems it fine. Claims on estates are money owed to others after someone has died. The individuals who are owed can file a claim if they believe it is right to do so. Therefore, if Grandpa Joe was into a lot of gambling before he died, or before he died, since Grandpa Laura just died, but either one of them, if either one of them were into a lot of gambling, then Esther might be in trouble. So who is informed when somebody dies? Social Security is informed when somebody dies. Sorry about that. Because they can't pay somebody's benefits whenever they're already dead. So essentially, those benefits have to be returned, like for the month that they came in. 401k, an account essentially becomes a part of a deceased estate, so it's not really going to do much. Pension, they need to be let known that that someone has died, with a view to establishing. Sorry about that. IRS, they need to be informed, in order to prevent legal action being taken and placing federal lien against their state. Insurance companies need to be informed in order to avoid policies being canceled and being vulnerable to property and liability losses. Same thing with life insurance and different things like that. Credit cards, they need to be informed just in case, in order to prevent fraud and avoid unnecessary fees, so they can close those cards, freeze their accounts, everything like that. Homeowners association, they need to be informed just to keep their interests protected and to ensure that the estate fulfills its obligation to the community. Bank accounts need to be promptly closed and funds need to be distributed between the next of kin and things like that. And any loan holders, they need to be informed, just to avoid any unnecessary foreclosure proceedings. Money and possessions. If there is no will, the surviving spouse and children of the deceased will usually inherit assets. The ownership of the land is then transferred to Grandpa Joe in the case that Grandma Laura does own a little plot in Ohio. Capital gains is the profit that you make from selling an asset. Grandpa Joe will be seen as the primary beneficiary, and Judy will be seen as the contingent beneficiary if you take instances in which on some insurance, or on some files rather, Grandpa Joe is the beneficiary on most of them. However, if Judy's on a few of them, she will be considered the contingent beneficiary, and Judy will only receive the death benefit if Grandpa Joe isn't reachable, since he is the primary beneficiary. The individual who receives the tax return from a deceased person is the executor or the administrator of the estate. Community property means that spouses who acquire land under marriage share it 50-50 with their spouse. Computer keys, titles and deeds and mail all need to be checked because computers may have important account information. Keys to houses, safes, storages, and possibly mailboxes. Titles and deeds, they can prove ownership of various different properties. And mail could possibly be notices from accounts, checks, and or bills. And if it's money, if you are their legal next heir, you may be able to file for unclaimed money owed to you if you'd like to do so. Additional questions to be answered. Info on death certificates. Typically going to be the victim's full name, date of birth, marital status, occupation, different things like that. Liability to recover money for long-term assistance essentially means that the state of Texas can ask for money back from their state after an individual dies. Joint assets are any property owned by two or more parties. Joint debt is any contract you share with someone else. And yes, Grandpa Joe is now the sole owner of the house now that Grandma Laura is gone. The surviving spouse may be made responsible for any debt accrued by Grandma Laura, which is going to be Grandpa Joe, unfortunately, Grandpa Joe. Sorry, guy. Sorry, buddy. The statute of limitations on debts and bills is going to be 4 years. Cultural and religious aspects. Since Grandma Laura and her family are atheists, they're not too big on the whole afterlife thing. They don't really believe that there's an afterlife. However, Christianity, Islam, and various pagan beliefs do believe that. And other religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism believe in reincarnation. During visitations, Catholics like to hold a brief prayer, and with the saying of the rosary. At different funerals, Muslim and Jewish individuals do not embalm. Additionally, Hindu and Buddhist people do not wear black. They wear white, because black's customary in America, things like that. For graveside traditions, Christians have something called a committal, and it is customary to throw some dirt and or mud into the coffin while that is happening. And during burials, the Baha'i community have their members who are over the age of 15 wear burial rings. And then they're wrapped in about 5 layers of silk and different things like that, and then they're buried. First time hearing about that? My first time too. So, Grandma Laura and her funeral preparations. So, Grandma Laura, she was a sweet old lady. However, sometimes she was kind of strict. So growing up, the kids would say, "Grandma Laura, I'm hungry. She'd say, "Okay, We have bread, we have peanut butter. Go make that. They'd be like, I don't want that. She said, okay, then make a salad. They say, I don't want that. She said, okay, do us a favor and don't spend any money then. And then that would give the kids a choice to choose between either peanut butter sandwiches or salads. And guess how she made so much money? By only buying white bread, peanut butter, and lettuce. Yup. They live like farm animals when they're younger. I bet you didn't know that. So, they're pretty rich, but Grandma Laura was a fan of simplistics. And she always said, whenever they were growing up, she always said, simple is the way to go. That's why she always offered them either two options or starve. So, just to make this all simple, they decided to cremate Grandma Laura. Because she wasn't really on the whole pre-planning death. She just said, keep it simple. So that's what they did. They cremated her, and they put the ashes in an urn. Grandma Laura, I believe she's happy. Well, I mean, they're atheists, so they don't really believe in the whole afterlife thing. However, I'm Christian, and I believe Grandma Laura's happy. So I really hope she's happy. And that is my Biomed final project.